Welcome to Charcha 2020. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lakshmi, and I will be your host for the plenary tracks of this conference. We are very happy to host all of you in this virtual conference, as well as the many others that are joining us through the multiple live streaming platforms. Over the next 3 days, we and our co-hosts are very excited to bring to you conversations on a wide range of development issues with over 400 speakers from across the development ecosystem. COVID warriors, Nobel laureates, economists, government officials, nonprofit leaders, philanthropists, and many more. We have a fairly packed schedule ahead of us, so I would like to quickly share some logistics details. My colleagues Isha and Tanvi will be supporting the plenary session. They will share some important instructions for Q&A as well as other updates on the chat window, so please do look out for it. Feel free to reach out to them for support during the sessions as well. With that out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce our very first speaker of the conference, Mr. Muthuraman, ex-Vice Chairman of Tata Steel. Mr. Muthuraman has served on the boards of several leading corporates and academic institutions in India. He was conferred with the Padma Bhushan in 2020. We're also very privileged that he's among the early supporters of the Nudge Foundation. Welcome, sir. I invite you to open Charcha 2020.
Thank you, Lakshmi, and good afternoon to all of you, delegates, speakers, and the panelists. As we all know, COVID-19 is really threatening to push back some 200 million people or more in India much deeper into poverty. If this were to happen, this will undo the work all of us have done over several years to lift millions of people out of the poverty line. This is indeed a very serious issue and needs to be addressed immediately. Conversation on this subject needs to begin now so that we are not too late to take action. This is precisely the reason for Charcha 2020. Conceived barely 2 weeks ago by the Nudge Foundation, today we launched the coming together of 16 host patrons, 100 plus development organizations, delivering 150 or more hours of content and learning, reaching over 10,000 participants over the webinar and lakhs more through the live channels across the Quint and other media houses. But this is just the beginning of a series of actions all of us can and must take to put India back on its developmental journey towards economic prosperity and social well-being. I wish this conference all success. It's once again a pleasure for me to welcome all of you. Over to Lakshmi.
With those words setting the tone for Charcha 2020, I would like to move on to our first plenary session, Convergent India to a Better, Dr. Rajiv Kumar and Amit Chandra. Dr. Rajiv took over as the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog in the rank and status of Cabinet Minister on 1st September 2017. He also serves as the Chancellor of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune, on the Central Board of RBI and State Bank of India. Dr. Rajiv has doctoral degrees in economics from Lucknow University and Oxford University. Welcome to the conference, sir.
Thank you.
Amit Chandra is the founder and chairman of the India office of Bain Capital Private Equity and is a renowned philanthropist. Over the years, Amit has served on the boards of many leading corporates and non-profits, including Tata Sons, Genpact, Piramal Enterprises, Ashoka University, Akansha Foundation, and Give India. He and his wife Archana were awarded the Asia Heroes of Philanthropy Award in 2016. Welcome, Amit, and over to you for this session.
Thank you, Lakshmi. My compliments to the team at Nudge for organizing Charcha 2020, a dialogue which is very much needed at this point of time. Thank you so much, Rajiv, for being a part of this plenary session. I don't think we could have had any better speaker than you for this session. Thank you, Muthu, for your opening remarks and setting the tone for this discussion. Um, I'd like to build upon what Muthu said and open up with a few thoughts on why we must converge before I hand over to Rajiv for his opening remarks. The crisis has been a very humbling experience for me. It's made me really realize how small I am, and indeed how small I think many of us are. We have truly an outstanding set of speakers in this conference, but I think COVID has made us really realize how small countries are and how small all of us are as individuals relative to this huge problem that we face. At the same time, I think it has made us appreciate that if we truly plan ahead and if we collaborate, that we can achieve a lot in fighting big problems. But as Muthu pointed out, it's important to put the problem ahead in perspective. We've made a lot of progress over the many years and accelerated in the past 5-7 years, but we were still a work in progress economy. 1/5 of our citizens were below the poverty line just before COVID struck us. And as recent surveys point out, 2/3 of households are now reasonably stressed on account of what's happened with COVID. And I think till a vaccine really emerges, we're going to face some sort of challenges which are going to continue stressing us out. 100 million jobs have been lost as per some surveys. Hopefully, many of these will be temporary and will come back. But all of these are statistics, and what haunts me and keeps me up many nights are actually the images. The hungry faces I see when I step out occasionally for a walk, or especially those of people who are reduced to beg, who really don't want to beg. Many of them are begging for the first time. The images that journalists have been posting of migrants walking thousands of kilometers home. The posts on Facebook of youngsters whose dreams are shattered because they don't know whether they'll get jobs in the next few years. The phone calls I often get of people begging for a hospital bed for a relative, who they know will die if they don't get a hospital bed on time. I mean, these are images and voices that really haunt me and make me wonder as to what we are really going to do to rebuild India in the decades, in the years ahead. It's for all these people and for all these statistics that we must converge and ensure that India is not set back by decades, but at best we have a temporary setback and we start this job of rebuilding with some degree of urgency. I know that the government is going to do a lot, and I know the government is going to have its hands more than full. The good news about this crisis is that civil society and NGOs have proven that it is capable of galvanizing and doing a lot. If it wasn't for civil society and NGOs, millions of people would have actually faced extreme hunger. Maybe thousands would have died. Many migrants would have erupted in anger, and we would have actually had a law and order problem, which the administration would have faced if it wasn't for what civil society would have done. And I think the government, I know in many places, is deeply appreciative of the role that civil society has played. I think the next phase, civil society and NGOs need to actually work hand in hand with the government in figuring out how it can actually rebuild India by starting to focus on livelihoods as the next set of issues. So we need to now think about what we can do to look at things more strategically and collaboratively. Civil society and NGOs are facing their own set of challenges at this point of time. With what has happened to companies, CSR funding is beginning to dry up rapidly, and that poses its own set of problems for NGOs. Working in a manner in which is not fragmented as NGOs have worked in the past is going to be critical. Many NGOs are going to face the issue of viability, and they'll have to find ways to reinvent themselves. Long neglected problems will actually rise to the top, and so new priorities will emerge. New ways of working will need to be found from a delivery perspective. But I think what's most important in all of this is that NGOs and civil society have proven that a sense of purpose and dedication is what makes this sector special. And that's what will stand it in good stead in the years and decades ahead as a beacon of hope to the rest of humanity. And I think I'd like to end at least my opening remarks with that beacon of hope as we look at the way to help rebuilding India. With that, I'd like to actually hand over to Rajiv and get him to deliver his opening remarks, and then we can engage in, I wouldn't call it a fireside chat. The fire is burning outside. We'd like to have more of a conversation and then open it up to a Q&A session. But Rajiv, over to you. I know the audience is eagerly waiting for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit, and hi, and my compliments, adding my compliments to what Amit said about Nudge India organizing this, I think, an important dialogue, important conference. So Atul and Isha, congratulations, well done. Look forward to interacting with you even further. Apologies to Mr. Muthuraman because I was a little late. I thought nothing started at least 2 minutes past the hour, but you started 2 minutes ahead of the hour. But so I missed your opening remarks. So sorry about that. Friends, I think this is a topic that is very close to my heart, and therefore, if I do kind of get overboard, as it were, in my remarks, and if you feel that I've kind of crossed some lines, then apologies in advance, because I will not like to mince words. I like to say whatever I can. I want to. And let me start off by saying that COVID-19 has become like a proverbial low tide. And when the low tide comes, all of us are caught with our, with all the warts, with all the frailties and weaknesses that we have. And COVID-19 has done that for our society, which is that it really has, projected in many ways what have been the weaknesses, the sort of, the extreme, inequality, if you like, the misery of vast numbers of people, and so on. And I think this is therefore, in some sense, it sounds like a very, very important wake-up call for all of us, not for just us, for the whole world, as it were, in some sense. And I think to that extent, we must follow the Prime Minister's call for converting this into an opportunity. And I do want to say that I think that post-COVID, I mean, there will be, from what I've seen, people will talk about a pre-COVID and a post-COVID, BC and AC sort of world that we have got, because many things in this world order will change. I hope for the better, but I'm not so sure that all of them would be for the better, but we should be prepared for that. And I think there are at the moment a huge number of unknowns and huge number of unknown unknowns that will unfold before us before this pandemic is out. And geopolitics, geostrategy, geoeconomics, all of that could change. And I think for us to be prepared to face that, we need to have the agility, we need to have the flexibility, we need to have also the convergence amongst all stakeholders to be able to face that new world and make the best of it. And I'm being, in some sense, parochial, of course, for the world, but I'll make the best of it as far as we, the 130 billion people, Indians, are concerned, how to engage with that world so that we are able to make the best of it, sometimes of not very good situations that may arise in the coming years. So we need for that, and I'm not using it as a cliche, but we do need a new India at this point of time. We need to think differently, we need to behave differently, and Nudge, I think, is the best sort of, in some sense, icon for it, because we need to nudge ourselves and nudge everybody else for this behavioral change that must come about if we want to take India forward in a changing, rapidly changing world where several turbulences have combined today. I mean, there is There's a geopolitical turbulence that we can see. There's a massive technology turbulence, that has never been seen before. People who have led Kai-Fu-Lee's AI superpowers would know that we are getting into a situation where technology will replace all sorts of jobs without the possibility of it creating new industries, being able to create enough jobs, for that, for those which are lost. You've got social turbulence of all varieties. And you've got the environmental turbulence, because I mean everywhere, if you see, it seems almost as if a crisis is imminent, and there is a call, therefore, from nature, from global community, from the technology world, for us to step up to the plate. Because if we don't, and if we go on with the business as usual, then I'm sure we will fail. We'll fail ourselves. We'll fail humanity, and I don't know the consequences of that. So I think my really the first point that I want to emphasize is that we must jettison any ideas of business as usual, let alone not jettison any complacency that we might have, which we are very used to, by the way, all of us, especially us. We tend to get complacent very quickly, because a nice dose of fatalism and a nice dose of and an inurement, in us being inured to our surroundings, and so on. I mean, so need to think differently, and that can be, in some sense, the theme of my song, as it were, going forward, and the rest are examples in some sense. One part of it, of thinking differently, is that we must make note of how dualistic a society we have become, how dualistic an economy we have become. I mean, it is us and them all the time, everywhere. And there are so many examples, so many statistics that I can cite you on this. But if you look at any area, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's recreation, entertainment, it's us and them. And this dualism is so marked that yesterday, for example, I was taking a meeting here of educational technology. Now, there are, at the top end of this educational technology pyramid, the best courses, the best things available for a very high price. And at the same time, when I thought as to how we should extend it, I was told that 64% of our schools in this country don't have electricity. And only 35% of schools have internet connections. And the bandwidth there is incredible. You can imagine what there is. Now, how do we talk about education technology? How we talk about clicks plus bricks, which we keep talking about it, at all the time in our own conversations, until we rectify, what's happening to those 64% of the schools that we've got? No electricity, and have we put enough attention on that? I'm not a bleeding heart. I'm not a socialist. I was one at one point in time. I was a rank communist, a sort of blazing communist, when I left college, and ran away. But these are realities that you can see today. Health. I mean, 200 children die every day in this country from diarrhea and pneumonia. Every day. That's like a Airbus 320 crashing every day. But I mean, does it make news in this country? 38% of our children are undernourished, before the age of 3. And that means that their brain development is stopped. They're not at all anymore, sort of in some sense useful to the knowledge economy that we're going to create. 50% of our women are anemic. So this dualism has to end. And what can we do to end this dualism? And I think we should put this dualism very upfront, right, middle and center of any agenda, of any conversation that we talk about. And we, the elite, and I'm counting all of us as ourselves, must now no more become, immune to this. I remember the time, and I must say, and I confess this with some embarrassment. At one point of time, I had stopped going to Mumbai because it was so much in the face. When I would travel from the airport, via something, and when the taxi will take me to the to the road which runs along the port line, or which will take me via Sion and so on. And I said I couldn't take it anymore. And I really admired my friends who would live there and then have the chores next door, juxtaposed cheek to cheek, and yet have nothing, and be so. I mean, but that's what the reality is in this country. And I do happen to go out very often about 100 kilometers radius around Delhi as a point. I do that, and go 50 kilometers out of Delhi. This is a different world that we are living there. So what can we? So this immunization. So I hope COVID has inoculated us enough to tell us that we will not let this happen to us ourselves, because that actually is really in some sense undoing of our own humanity. And whatever profession we might be, whatever we do, I think that's something that we just need to go, and therefore, and by the way, here again, I must refer to the fact that I was even more shocked. My wife runs a NGO for taking care of leprosy affected people. I don't know how many of you have been to one of those colonies, right in the middle of every urban center, etc., and and see how the people live, and what and Amit referred to the to people begging on the streets, etc. The knock on your window on your car should awake us all the time. Now here, I must therefore say that there is a huge role that is played, what let me call them as shadow institutions in our society. These are the charity organizations, these are the religious trusts, these are the gurdwaras, these are the the temples, the masjids, and so on, which run a parallel network actually all the time, not just in COVID, but regularly, I mean, as it were, and without them, and they don't get recognized, they're not a part of our mainstream dialogue. I think it's time to mainstream them. It's time to mainstream every civil society organization. I like to call them development partners rather than civil society organizations, and surely not NGOs, because why should we refer to them to anybody as a non-government? I just don't see the point of that. So let's call them development partners, for God's sakes, and all of them should now become as a part of the mainstream, because without them, as Amit has said, we can't possibly do anything that we want to do. Now, how do we do that is the question, and what do we how do we go about it? But before I come to that, I think there is a third stakeholder in the room. I don't know whether, there you are, Amit is there, and Muthu is there, and so on, which is the corporate world, which is the world which must be on board with the government and the development partners, the civil society, without whose presence and without whose active participation, I think we will not go anywhere at all. And I think it is important because large number of us, get satisfaction by doing something on the side, and the CSR is an activity which we hand over to some wives' clubs, or some people to run for them. I think this has to get integrated within our main business order. And there is now a very good movement called conscious capitalism. When I was Secretary General of FICCI, I wanted to bring that in, but I'm afraid I was thwarted completely and totally in doing so. Our own Raj Sisodia, professor at, I think, Bentley College, and then one more person who written books on it. The short point being, and we can go back into the question, that the Adam Smithian capitalism of the 18th century is no more sufficient for our world. At that time, women were not in top positions. At that time, there was no question of labor rights. Marx wrote about it in very amazing terms, that if workers were found in the cities, loitering around, for the third time, they were actually hot iron was used to mark them as V, which is vagrants. And then they were sent to workhouses to work for free in Manchester and Liverpool. Now that capitalism is gone, dead and gone. And we haven't yet in India not even tried to rediscover a new form of capitalism. The Japanese have done it. The Koreans have done it. The Chinese have made a capitalism which has got seamless between public sector and private sector. You don't know where one ends and one begins. We haven't been able to do that. We still, despite what Yogi Deveshwar did in terms of when he was the CII president, to talk consistently about the triple bottom line, etc., I am not sure whether this has got integrated into our corporate behavior, into our corporate ethics, as it were. And CSR, it's a travesty to say that you have to mandate to N%, 2 or whatever percent for that to go to the CSR. And I think the new mantra has to be that you can do well while doing good. And I think that's where we must, all three of us, come on the same platform and have a conversation where we know that we have to do well for the country, and whatever we do, we have to get our act together to go beyond oneself. This whole last 70 years or more, or maybe even earlier, I mean, because of our poverty and so on, there is this famous saying from Ramayana, "Koi nrip hoye hame kahani, dasi chhod na bani ho rani." So there you go. If that mentality sticks to us, or the mentality that keep away from the government, because you come near the government, that means trouble. So the less government, the less you see of them, the better off you are. All of that has to change. And just like in the national movement, when the corporate world was with the national movement leaders and Gandhi didn't wink an eyelid to stay in the Birla House, again the time has come when we must change and not use the titles of some business houses as in some sense slurs in our conversation. All that has to change. And I think this time has come to create that platform where the three of us can come together. And there are two or three things that I want to say in this regard, and then I've taken enough time as it were. But just before that, we in Niti Aayog have a portal called Darpan, which today has 90,000 development partners listed on them. By the way, I don't know if you know that there are 3.6 million CSOs in this country. I think less than 30% of them get their accounts audited. That portal, can actually become the basis for creating this platform with the help from all of those. Now, what are the two or three minimal conditions that I want to put forward here? One, as I said earlier, repeating myself, there will be no point coming to that portal or to that platform if you're going to constantly think about what is in it there for me. You got to stop that. I mean, I think we need to get through it. That's the first part of it. The second is that we got to change the mindset that the government is the Mai Baap government, the Parvardigar government, the colonial government, which is going to do everything for us. No, sorry. The government it's not the colonial government. The degrees of freedom that the Indian state enjoys, I think, is far too much at all levels. So the second thing would be that we need to get accountability into the system, at least on this platform, so that everybody who comes to that platform is open to being accountable, is open to being questioned and work forward on that regard, whichever stakeholder you come from. Third, I think, is complete transparency in whatever you're doing, and transparency and full disclosure, that you're doing this for this reason and that's what you've got. Fourth, I think honest, candid feedback. I worked in both industry organizations, and that was one thing that was completely missing from there. Because that was just they were set up for giving a feedback for the government, but that's exactly what I think they have failed to do. They do it in private, perhaps, but I remember a conversation with the former finance minister who said, "Why are you telling me this? Your members come and tell me something completely the opposite." And so on. So now this feedback is important, because if you don't have, then the system is in disequilibrium. Now, if we have those 4 or 5 conditions, and I don't want to go on any longer, but then we can get a convergence. And finally, we can get a convergence only if we get a target for ourselves. 1990, India and China had the same per capita income of about $350 odd. Today, they are 5 times our size, 5 times per capita income size. Can we agree to a target for ourselves? He is coming with us. Most of the audience would be in their prime by the time we celebrate the centenary of our republic. Maybe I won't be there. I suppose not. But for you guys, you have to decide for your own target for 2047. Where would you want India to be? And then create a movement, then create a platform where all the 3 stakeholders can put together in a context where you're going to remain a full democracy with equal rights and human rights and so on, where your carbon constraint would be biting, so that you won't have the you don't have the liberty of retrofitting. You will have to do whatever you can. And third, where the global economy and the global world is going to be so turbulent that we haven't seen it in the past few decades. Thanks for listening to me. I can't listen.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Just now, only now. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. You made a number of fascinating points. First of all, I love the term of development partners. I think we should be using a lot more of that than simply NGOs. You made a number of fascinating points, Rajiv, and I wanted to start off by building on one, which has particularly come to haunt the hotspots that have arisen in COVID, actually. Mumbai, Pune, Delhi, and many of the other cities. And we realize that the correlation of all these hotspots is essentially because of the prevalence of slums. And I think many people, especially the skeptics, used to, scoff at campaigns like Swachh Bharat, etc. And we now realize the wisdom of some of them. There were also a lot of skeptics who used to laugh at the role of many NGOs in wash campaigns. I think today we realize the wisdom of them. I think I would love to start off by having a short conversation with you on what do you think the opportunity is in the years ahead for civil society and the government to work constructively, collaboratively in redefining what happens to this really sticky problem that has existed for many, many decades in many of our metropolitan cities. I mean, even you talked about the problem in Mumbai. I've actually, even as we speak, my wife and I have been working in Dharavi and M Ward. M Ward is actually even worse than Dharavi. The life expectancy in M Ward is 41 years in a city where, life expectancy is in the 60s. And, the sanitation conditions are absolutely abysmal. It's not surprising that once the germ entered there, that we have the crisis that we have on our hands. So, we've seen that World War II actually was a crisis that resulted in the rebuilding of many of today's most developed nations. How do we really convert this crisis, as you, rightly, put forth as a platform, into really an opportunity for different people to come together as partners and rebuild India's slums? Love to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, thanks a ton. And I hope you'll see a piece of mine in either the Hindu or Business Line just on this topic, maybe a day after, or even tomorrow, because what I've argued there is that 11 cities in India account for 66% of COVID cases. That's the toll, and I think it's shown up very clearly that it is this acute congestion and the lack of civic amenities that's become a real cause for all of this. And the Dharavi density is 3.75 lakh per square kilometer. I mean, it's unimaginable. What's led me to from there, little differently from what you're saying, is that we need to rethink our urban development model completely, ab initio. We have to go back to the drawing board. And there, I used to poo-poo it for, when I was earlier, when I was a nice red-blooded communist. But Gandhi said a lot of good things there. I'm not talking about self-sufficient villages, but I'm talking about urban. I'm talking about Abdul Kalam Azad's work, development, and Professor Indresen's work on Pura, which is the urban amenities in rural areas. And there's a talk, and I've got a presentation. Some architects in Bhopal have got together as to how you can create satellite cities which will decongest our metros. See, I think that's what we need to do today. What we need to do, and I think the important thing, so let me first emphasize that one, we have had we've had only a parody of urban planning. I mean, we need to get that organized, first. But when you do that, you need to rethink completely how India's urban spaces will develop. And I think Kerala is a very good model. You don't know where, in Kerala, where rural begins and urban ends. And therefore, by the way, Abraham Reuben from IDFC pointed out to me when we were in Kerala together that in the official records, 66% of Kerala is rural, while actually the opposite is true. But that's the official record of it. But nonetheless, so if you, and the one thing about the city that we had heard from urban planners of Harvard and so on, is that they are the centers of innovation because they allow, crossing the dots, and they allow multiple, interaction of multiple disciplines. Technology has changed that. Today, you can all interact on the cloud, with all your ideas. So you don't need physical proximity as you did when Manhattan came up. And that explained, man, you can change that. So today, if you get your, fiber everywhere in the bandwidth that you want, you can get talents, dispersed all over the country and who could be interacting. I'm just saying that simply to say that's feasible today. It's feasible today, and not just feasible, but for everything that we need, whether it's the carbon footprint, the green, the equity, etc., and the elimination of dualism. You need to rethink urban, ab initio. And this is where the three development partners must collaborate. We must encourage younger architects to come up, and create our, carbon positive spaces and etc. So we can go into the details, but this could be a platform, this could be a niche area where all the three of us could come together and say, this is what we want in India in 2047 to look like, and therefore we need to reverse all of this and we need to build further. And I think that would be a great goal to achieve.
Yeah, the other issue, Rajiv, that you touched upon in your opening remarks, and again, I wanted to just use the opportunity to build upon it and get your thoughts on how you think civil society can act as a partner for the government in helping address is this whole issue of reimagining livelihoods. On one hand, we any case had a problem which technology was precipitating of, greater amount of unemployment. And it was very gradual. Not many jobs were getting created. And then suddenly we've had a situation where many people have got thrown off the payrolls. It seems that we'll have to reimagine livelihoods from scratch in order to ensure, as Mr. Muthuraman put it, hundreds of people aren't pushed back into poverty. Otherwise, we'll really have to create a massive welfare state. What role do you think NGOs, civil society can play in ensuring that, we really reimagine livelihoods and we don't have a real crisis on our hands in that area?
Very honestly, I haven't thought through this, Amit. Just in the sense that I thought through the urban situation, but not this one. It's a very complex, very real, very, very important issue that you raised here. And the other day I was in a meeting with a group of people, and I heard the very true remark that given the crisis now, people, human employees will be even at a further discount because people know that they can disrupt their business. So I would rather have a non-human doing my job because they don't walk away. They don't require. So I mean that's the sort of. But here and I'm thinking aloud at the moment. But let me start off by where I mentioned earlier. Kai-Fu Lee, who was the CEO of Amazon and I think Microsoft and now went back, he went through a cancer and so on. He talks about the fact that even a universal basic income scheme will not suffice in the new world because you cannot expect a society where you just kind of give away a dole to a section of the people and say that, look, you exist, however high that dole might be. people would have to, a part of our identity is that we think that we are contributing to the society in some ways or the other. And if you're just on a UBI, you don't do that. So he comes up, and I think this is where we together, development partners, all of us can work together, is to try and create an empathetic society first and foremost. Society which empathizes with the other. Because without that you won't get anywhere. And this is, by the way, this goes beyond charity. You can't just go give food and clothes and come back and then I got done well and all the guilt is gone. No, empathy is something different. Empathy is an ongoing emotion. Empathy is something which drives your behavior. So I think it sounds trite and it sounds probably, but I think that's the necessary condition. Beyond that, what you will need to do is then accept the situation that only a part of us will be engaged in so-called productive labor, which produces goods and services which other people consume. And so what we need to do, therefore, is to think consciously about how we bring in the other aspects like culture, entertainment, art, craft as a part of our consumption basket. Nature, nature and society and all of that. And because there can be a large number of us who can be delivering that. And that's one area where we can absorb many, many more. If, for example, wildlife could be a part of our consumption basket, we can have thousands of volunteers trying to save, the bird species which we are losing by the day. So do you see what I'm saying? And again, there is this division so far, which is that if you're not productively employed, then you're dispensable. How to change that? How do we change that? And so that's one part of it, and that the other part, and therefore from the very childhood, if our classroom, we can introduce that. Again, going back to Gandhi, he brought this idea of Nai Talim, which said that every child from the age of 6, 7 onward should get to know everything about the flora, fauna around their own, habitation, about the village and the city that you're living in. We start our education by learning first about the Andes and then about the Aravallis, but that can be reversed because then we'll get sensitive to where we are. That's the first part. The second part is this requires a very big change in our education system, which is that the education should be such that gives us the agility, the mental capability and the mental agility to adapt to changing conditions. Because livelihood will change. On an average in the US, people change, I think, 3.7 careers in their lifetime. In our case, we get in at one at 21 and we don't leave this till 61. So that has to change. That will change, unfortunately. And hopefully that change will come also within the sector that I am currently in, which is the government. Now, I think those are a couple of things that we need to think about. And I think it's important, by the way, that we introduce, the non-material aspects in the consumption basket that we have. But we are actually at a stage much earlier than that, which is that our own delivery of public services, health and education and environment and swachhata, and we need to there create livelihoods around them rather than only think about all the time being obsessed with manufacturing, as we very often tend to do. And we'll create a society which can be much better than what we have today.
Yeah. Sorry, I needed to be unmuted. Yeah, and in fact, I wanted to just build on that. I do think that there may be an opportunity, Rajiv, as you rightly put it, for us to potentially look at reimagining livelihoods by defining what are some of the most important problems facing humankind rather, and figuring out if workforce can actually be redeployed to solving them. I mean, for example, climate change. How many people are actually focused on solving climate change? Can hundreds of thousands of people be deployed in that area working with development partners? How many people are currently working on afforestation, for example, as an initiative? And I think we need to first just redefine that. How many people are working, for example, on health initiatives in, India's, aspiration districts? And there could be great opportunities in just addressing some of the problems that you talked about, malnutrition, for example. And I think people have historically, these are areas which have been significantly understaffed. And we could use this as an opportunity to go after some of those most sticky problems. So I agree with you. I think you've probably seeded some of the kernels for re-looking at livelihoods. And there could be problems which have been understaffed in the past that we could go after. And maybe that's worth thinking about in greater degree of detail. Rajiv, I want to shift gears a little bit.
Can I just add one thing
Yes,
here?
please.
Because we, both of us have been guilty of not bringing in at all the concerns of the women,
Yes.
into our conversation. And I think we should do that. I say this simply because you need a large number of people to work to first find out why India has such a low female labor participation rate, and then to work on that to improve that. In the sense that what are the conditions that we need? And creches are not the only answer, by the way. There's a lot more that's going on there. And how do we bring them in? And given the technology, we can use that. Now, that again can be a source of a livelihood for a very large number of people. How to, care, how to protect, how to safeguard, how to, go for, look after the interests of women so that they can contribute more to the society, as we go forward. I think that's one area that we can. And just one other sentence, Amit, redefining the share of public goods in our consumption basket. All that you referred to were public goods, which is, the environment and the climate, etc. And, you can need, clean water and rivers, and lakes and all of that. How many people get employed or deployed there? Zilch. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, I've come across a few organizations which are done some good work in that area and started seeding it. But I think a lot more needs to happen in that area. Rajiv, I want to move to questions which are coming through, and they're actually well over 100 questions already. I think and that's probably because the meter stops after 99, and I'm having trouble tracking all of them. So my apologies to the audience. I'm going to go with what's bubbling up on my chat line. There's a question from Radha Madhav Mela. While corporates did activity-based CSR during the COVID crisis, do you think that they can make these more long-term goals with proper assessment criteria? Should they be aligning their, these with SDGs as a longer-term strategy? What's your view on that, Rajiv?
Over to you, I suppose.
I do think, as Rajiv, as actually you pointed out in your comments, that many of the areas that all that COVID has done is actually it's taken areas that have been neglected for decades and highlighted them. It's probably just highlighted them suddenly. And these are areas, for example, sanitation, urban development, which should have been the area of focus for us for many, many years. And so I think, yes, some of these are things that we should be focusing on. They should be aligned with SDGs, and they should be a part of, the CSR objectives for organization. And by the way, I do think many corporates, unfortunately, keep changing their CSR objectives, on a sometimes annual basis. They should actually have long-term CSR objectives.
Yeah, just to add to what you said, Amit, which is that SDGs offer a wonderful framework for us to direct and focus our attention and our efforts, as it were. And I think in Niti Aayog, we have created a little sort of a ball, a little circle with all the SDGs, and it's kept right in the lobby so that everybody can notice them every morning. Corporates could start off by creating an awareness about SDGs, in their own sphere. That's the first important thing. I think that's the one thing that they can do. And the second thing is that, they can adopt one or two SDGs as their principal concerns, whichever they choose, and then continue to work on them, as it were. But the third, as I said earlier in my talk, which is that I think it's important now to integrate some of that into your daily routine, in some way, because if for example, you adopt, let's say, just a mundane thing, maybe like child nourishment. Can corporates make sure that every child of every worker in their establishment is not undernourished. Can they take that guarantee? Not as a part of doing charity, but just as something that is that's done. Or and lastly, I think the Prime Minister has said this very often. We need to convert our development into a Jan Andolan. You see, development is not being done by them, and we are not the recipients of development. And we are not. Development is us all. And I think the corporates, with their vast resources in terms of networking and in terms of being able to change public opinion, they can just do that for a while. Just like the national movement time that happened, that the corporates at that time converted national movement into a Jan Andolan led by Gandhi. Can we try and do that? The development is about all of us, and the corporates would take the lead in spreading this awareness, because that is the only way that you will improve accountability in our system.
Rajiv, there are lots of questions, but since you invoked Gandhiji, I'm going to, and we have 2 minutes left, I'm going to try to get your thoughts on one issue in the wrap-up question, which is, many of us in the corporate world have a tendency to try to do something, send out a press release, make sure that people know we have done something. And you use the words Jan Andolan. How do we make sure that everyone out there moves to a spirit of not just doing something, but knowing that we have done whatever best we could? How do we make this truly a Jan Andolan? How do we invoke this spirit? It exists in much of the not-for-profit sector. They could have sat down and, been bystanders, but people have really rolled up their sleeves, and you can see how people have engaged.
Maybe give you a very maybe not a useful, but a very practical example, which is that if all the CEOs of our companies in the formal sector, forget the informal sector for a while, but if all the CEOs took a weekly or a monthly town hall and asked their employees, their workers, as to what have they done to the society, in that week or in that month, other than what they've done, and not charity, but actually where have they gone and involved themselves? Have they cleaned up the beaches, or have they looked after the park, or did they go and look after the servants' quarters, etc.? All of that is development, by the way, right?
Yes.
And you could think about, several other things. So if you just did a town hall, I think the movement will catch on, and you can then involve your development partners into doing that, so that they can all come in together. And you will see, lo and behold, I won't even give it 5 years before development is a Jan Andolan.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. Always wonderful talking to you. I remember the last time you and I did a fireside chat, again, without any fire, at the CII Healthcare Summit. Thank you so much for launching the plenary. And over to you, Lakshmi.
Thank you so much, Rajiv and Amit, for this fantastic session. You've given us so much to think over. But I think one line that is going to stay with me is something that Rajiv mentioned early in the session. We cannot fail. So I suppose with that, as a rallying cry, we will now be breaking off and moving to different Zoom links for the respective tracks. Thank you everyone so much for joining us for this kickoff session. We have some very interesting sessions across various tracks coming up: skill development, law and justice, rural development, and so many more. You can use the Charcha website or the Attendify app to navigate to the sessions that you wish to attend. We will reconvene back here at 7 p.m. for the next plenary session with Kailash Satyarthi. Until then, have a great day, and thank you so much once again.